Fox Vintage Snowmobile. I'm Al Pinkney. This will be a short series on a rebuild of a 660 Rhino Yamaha engine. It's a side-by-side utility vehicle. We had a neighbor that he found that it was pumping excessive oil and blowing blue smoke and wasn't acceptable, so he had time for me to tear it down. So we'll tear it down, measure the cylinder up, and see what we need to repair the oil consumption issue. Just a short word on my videos. I am not a professional small engine mechanic. I worked in the telecom industry for 31 years. Now this is my part-time retirement job. I'm a fairly crude mechanic, I know that, but we always get the job done after a few tries. So if you are a professional mechanic, this video is probably not for you. But if you're the backyarder, like most of us, you might appreciate what I'm doing. I'm just trying to share back a little of the things, put something back into YouTube instead of always taking it out. So thanks for watching. Unfortunately, I didn't start the camera yesterday when I started to tear it apart, but it's all quite straightforward. What we did was remove the air box to carburetor connection and undid the carburetor. A few electrical connections. I think there's a carb heater on that carb, and of course the choke. It's a carbureted model. Choke and throttle cable. So that came apart. Here's the cylinder head cover. A whole series of 6mm cap head screws. You take all those out and the cylinder head cover still won't come off because there are two inside the intake valve. I think that's the intake valve cover where you adjust the lash on the valve. So you got to be careful. Don't start beating on it unless you make sure you got all the screws out. Anyway, so that worked out. One down. Now with any luck, the cam sprocket will just pull off the flange, and we should be able to get the chain off the sprocket. And we should be able to actually lift the cam out because the sprocket doesn't want to clear. It has probably a decompression release set of weight. Uh-oh, not good. A set of decompression weights. I have no idea where that little piece came from. Probably right there. Yes, we'll have to refer to the service manual. But there'll be these weights at the resting position will probably open the exhaust valve a wee bit, so that if you were to pull rope start this engine, you could turn it over without breaking your arm, and easier on the starter. Once the engine starts, the weights will come out and let the exhaust valve work as it's supposed to. Polaris has similar. I imagine all the big engines do. Now, a little hint, or probably common sense, you try to get a piece of wire or something around that cam chain so to prevent it from falling way down inside the motor. I've had it happen. It's not the end of the world. You get a magnet and fish it out somehow and make sure it mates up with the sprocket. There's the cam. So now we'll work on taking the cylinder head off. This seat belt is annoying me to no end. We'll eliminate him from the equation. There's 4 long bolts that go down through the head, but there's also a number that come up from the bottom on the outside. So again, I guess make sure you got all the bolts out before you get the hammer going. Pretty good torque on these. Looks like it's loose. Cam, exhaust side, cam chain tension rail comes right out. I have done a few of these engines. In fact, 2 crankshafts. When you're done, you don't have many cookie trays left for small parts because there is lots to come apart. Now there's oil running out of this cylinder head, of course. We'll just set him aside and let him drain. And the top of that engine is wet. The top of the piston is wet with oil. So we've got a major failure here somewhere. Holy cats. Part of the problem is I don't want to skin all the skin off my knuckles. Woo! Sturdy. And of course there are two small cap screws down the side here, just to keep you on your toes. Whoops, washers. Four bolts and one washer so far. Four bolts, four washers. The base gasket seems to want to come along with us. Lo and behold, we have another coolant line on the engine, on the cylinder head. Didn't notice that. We'll undo that guy. Sorry about the bad camera angles. I can't seem to wiggle it in, but we pulled the cylinder off, as you saw, and I don't see any broken rings or like the oil ring doesn't seem to have a whole lot of tension left on it. But we'll take the piston out and clean things up and see what's going on. I don't see much wrong here right now. Thankfully, the piston pin is not seized into the piston that bad. It's quite friendly. So there we are. So we've rinsed the cylinder off in some solvent, and there's no big scratches or grooves in the bore, which is what I kind of thought I would find. In fact, they look really good, maybe shiny. And the rings, we're just popping the rings off. Two compression rings. And then the oil ring is always a little harder. The oil ring doesn't seem to be sitting out very far. Now, without measuring piston to cylinder wall clearance, it feels pretty tight for a big bore. In order to check the ring end gap, we put the ring in and center it with the piston. So we're just trying to determine what the ring end gap is. It's at least 30 thousandths. Somewhere around 32 thousandths on the top ring. Much bigger on the next ring. More than 45 thousandths, so we'll have to read the service manual and see what the spec is. Here's 53 thousandths. Yeah, way out there. So possibly it's just rings. So a way to see how good the valves are seating. This is not as much an oil consumption test as just a performance test. But we put the spark plug in the head and fill the cavity with solvent or gas and see how fast it runs out. So a while back I bought this dial indicator gauge for measuring inside of bores. And a little bit cumbersome to set up. You got to use a bunch of shims. But anyway, to see how out around this cylinder is, we measure left to, or front to back on the cylinder and left to right at different spots. And that's reading, I'm not sure what the actual measurement is, but we're about 11 thousandths there, About the same there. So at the bottom of the cylinder where there's no wear, we're about 9 to 11, and that's going across. So there's 2 thousandths wear from the original bore where the piston doesn't come all the way down. So there's about 1.5 inches of sleeve there that the rings never get at. So we're a couple thousandths there. If we turn the cylinder and go front to back, we're 11, again 11 at the bottom, and in the middle we're 13, 12. So we do have quite a taper in the cylinder, to be honest. So we'll have to go read the service manual and see what's acceptable. But as a mechanic that doesn't want to take this apart again, I'm probably going to recommend we bore this cylinder next oversize. It's really too bad, otherwise we could just get away with a hone job and a set of rings. But from the bottom of the cylinder, we're around 10.5 to 13, so we got about 3 thousandths taper. It's probably not acceptable. So we went onto our computer and looked at the service limits for the ring end gap and the cylinder taper, and the ring end gap limits are 11 to 17 thousandths. Well, one ring was over 50, so that's a dramatic wear. The taper in the cylinder is you're allowed 3.2 thousandths. So I talked to my very good friend Mike at Nippon Chrysler Yamaha. He's the mechanic there of the small engine, the snowmobiles and ATVs. And he said you could put rings in it, it would probably reduce the oil consumption, but you're almost at your wear limit right away. He said it wouldn't be a good repair. He also gave me some other tips on Rhinos as far as oil consumption, and they all check out. So anyway, we were going to send the cylinder away to Rec Supply in Saskatoon. They will in turn send it to R&L Cycle, where it'll be bored out to the next suitable oversize. Unfortunately, we'll have to buy a new, quite expensive piston and a gasket kit. So when the parts come back, we'll put her all back together. So we got a call from Recreation Supply in Saskatoon yesterday, and the cylinder, the piston has arrived and the cylinder has been bored to fit it. So later today we'll pick that up at the post office. We'll be able to get this show on the road. Now here's the cylinder head, and we got lots of carbon built up, which is sort of strange. But the other place, like with an engine that can consume oil, the other place it can drink oil is through the valve stem seals. So we're going to do this, give this head a little overhaul. We'll clean the carbon out as best we can and take the valves out. It's a 5-valve design, pretty cool. And lap the valves with valve lapping compound. We'll have a look at that. This is pretty backyard mechanic stuff. I know if you're running a regular machine shop, you'll probably turn over in your grave, but we'll give it a shot here. And put the new valve stem seals in and clean the head, and we'll be ready to put it together. We'll just pop the spark plug out. If we've got a new one in stock, we probably do, we'll throw a new one in. DPR8EA is what's in here. I think the customer put one in, but it's pretty oily already. Now we don't want to scratch anything in here too badly. Probably a wooden spatula would be a better choice, but we've got old Excalibur, our Richards paint scraper here. Three intake and 2 exhaust valves with 2 separate exhaust ports. You would think there'd be some horsepower and torque coming out of this 660. I don't know what the dyno says. I've got cans and cans of aerosol combustion chamber cleaner sitting around here. It should have been sprayed on here before. We'll give it a shot. Now it's all running out the spark plug hole. This is 320 grit, Gator grit, wet sandpaper, fairly fine. When we were working on our Nighthawk motorcycle, we built a piston ring compressor. Right. Valve spring compressor. So it's simply a matter of getting it lined up